Hey, get Brock here. In line with my Space Engineers guides, I figure I'd make a video on the following subject: decentralized versus centralized in regards to fleet usages. I'll discuss the pros and cons, and a lot of other details, including historical context in Space Engineers battles, and just theory. A lot of this, or some of this, has been covered in other videos, but I figured it'd be good to kind of do it as a single subject. You can see a link up top right here for other videos. So if you want to get caught up, maybe watch those. There are two main aspects to centralized versus decentralized. There's centralized versus decentralized command structures and decent and centralized formations. I'll cover the first today, the command structures, and then later at a second date. I do want to note, as I do in all of these types of videos, this is not a definitive guide. And the examples I use are from my SE server, which hosts a lot of PvP battles and in a certain selected environment, but there are rule sets, limitations, so on and so forth. So if you want to figure out what those limitations are, you should probably watch this What is Outlands video if you have no idea what I'm on about. This video is primarily for the commanders in my SE server and their factions, but this is also interesting for other viewers, kind of to see thought processes and all that stuff, because the discussion does come up and a lot of people are interested in it. So I figured we'd put it in video/audio form. So here we go. First off, this video, decentralized and centralized command structures. We'll start off with centralized. Generally, this is kind of speaking quite broadly, centralized command structures are described by strong leadership positions with a lot of micromanagement. Units moved to what the commander orders the units to move to, so thus the commander makes the call. This results in a very cohesive strategy because a single person is making all of the decisions, thus it feeds to a unified plan, right? Also, because commanders are usually chosen on merit, or at least some merit, and they usually have some experience at minimum, this usually means you have at least a decent battle plan being executed and not just a complete, clusterfuck, for the lack of a better term. As long as the units below him follow him and execute his order as expected, you have a very uniformly executed battle plan and style. This is very useful because you don't need to rely on your sub-commanders to be on the same wavelength as the commander. You just need them to execute the orders to the best of their abilities. Thus, you don't need sub-units to have strategic and overall knowledge, simply the ability to do orders and to be good at fighting, right? This, as a result, works very well for large unit formations with, let's just say, lowest common denominator type design. Historically, this was the command style, and it is, to a degree, still to this day. Historically, we're talking like 1800s and back, although even the 1815 wars kind of partook in this, and I'll get to an example in a bit. But with nobility being generally what led army formations, right? There are some examples in history where civilians could technically, join the military and learn, but typically nobility is what was the command structure of a military. Thus, a single general with a lot of practice in moving through the ranks as a noble, and the sub-commanders just existing really to enforce and convey the command of the general or admiral. It worked really well, right? Because you had the nobility, and then you had, for the lack of a better term, peasants as the cannon fodder of the military. Obviously, professional militaries did become a thing, but this was rare throughout history. Obviously, you can see the pros here. The entire unit, even without having fundamental knowledge of the strategy or the strategic situation, could act as a singular unit. In Space Engineers, our Rider faction sort of operates under this principle, obviously at a much smaller scale. They have a commander and sub-commanders. And generally, the commander gives all the orders. You go here, you stay here, and I want you to go here. And the subunits follow this order to a T if possible. This might sound controversial, but objectively, this is the best method of leadership for war, assuming information flow is near constant and perfect. Okay, so why is there other leadership styles? Why don't we stop the video there? Well, as you imagine, information flow is not instantaneous, nor is it even fast by any means. And a lot of times it's just not accurate, sometimes it's completely wrong. If the general or admiral gets bad information, he can only give out misguided information. And generally, because the leader is somewhat isolated from the battle, sometimes information is even wrong, slow, or misleading. Even in space engineers, what is going on in front of like a ship captain might not be properly conveyed to the commander, and then the commander gives out improper information. For example, in a recent battle, one of the ships let the commander know they were having engine issues, and the commander misinterpreted that as the ship being borderline lost and ordered it to retreat off the battle, even though it was actually near pristine and it was just simply having some engine keying issues. Furthermore, the head of the command, right, the commander, can be decapitated. Historically, usually this is metaphorically, but sometimes literally, and it takes time to rectify this. At minimum, information flow simply stops flowing, and subunits, because they rely on the commander to give them orders, suddenly don't have these orders anymore and must kind of switch gears. It also takes time to either replace or reestablish a link with command, right? Either get a new commander if it's been lost, right? Say a bridge gets blown out where the commander was commanding from, or that ship gets lost, or simply that data link gets cut. Right? It takes time to reestablish that, and that time the formation is incredibly vulnerable. Once again, this happened in Space Engineers. The commander was on a cruiser, and the cruiser took a direct round really early on in the battle to the face. And because the command staff had to relocate to the CIC, they weren't actually in the CIC, right? Because they were commanding. The unit had to kind of just wing it, and what ended up happening is one of the ships kind of ended up out of formation. Because he assumed something was happening, which wasn't happening, and that ship was lost. So ship was lost because command structure was temporarily disabled. Now there exists fail-safes for this. These things are called standing orders, right? Do this, and your standing orders are to, attack this thing. So if the command gets lost, the unit has some degree of flexibility in understanding what needs to be done. However, these are obviously not very in-depth. Standing orders are usually quite simple. Historically, take literally any battle in the Pacific, and the amount of times the commander's orders are just lost, like they just don't make it to the people of interest, misunderstood, or vital information that is supposed to go to the commander that could just change the course of the battle ends up playing a 4-hour game of telephone to reach said commander, and then he gets information that's just utterly wrong. It happens a staggering amount of times in the Pacific and in the Atlantic as well. And when I say Pacific Atlantic, I'm talking about the naval war in these two massive oceans during World War II. But anyway, a lot of people like to sum this up as fog of war, right? The information flow is never perfect. No one ever knows what's going on. Thus, information flow kind of has to happen. A lot of people say, war is the destroyer of plans, information, and order, which is the nemesis of centralized command. Thus, while centralized command is the premier way of commanding, assuming, omnipotence, the more you go into chaos, the more this command style starts to suck, for the lack of a better term. Okay, that gets us in the second command type, decentralized command. Trust me, I'll get more Space Engineers examples shortly. This command style relies far less on a commander. Don't get me wrong, there is always still a commander present. It's very rare to have a non-commander based unit. So this command style relies a lot more on the subunits, right? Not the main unit. The subunits understanding what the goal, objective, and most importantly, what the doctrine is. Real quick, since some people misuse this term, doctrine refers to, in short, there's nuance to it, but in short refers to the sum total of SOPs. What are SOPs? Standard operating procedures. So a very basic doctrine would be, or a very basic subcomponent of a doctrine, right, a single SOP. If my unit takes contact, this is kind of referring to infantry, but if my unit takes contact, I will dig in, suppress the position I am taking fire from. If I determine victory is possible, I will pin, fire maneuver, close and kill. Or victory is impossible, contact command, pin the enemy, and delay and wait for further orders. Right? Because you need to contact command, even in a decentralized structure, because you rarely have the complete picture. Right? And that's a very basic SOP. There are SOPs for literally everything, and honestly for some things that shouldn't have SOPs, but yeah. The sum total of the SOPs represents a doctrine. Why am I talking about doctrine so much? Because both centralized and decentralized commands have doctrine, right? But a military with a heavy, or a navy, or infantry, whatever, with heavy emphasis on decentralized command structures need to be sure all units are very fluent with the doctrine and executing said doctrine. This is good, obviously, right? If your units know how to do the things, they're less like robots and more like actual human beings with the ability to adapt and be flexible. However, this comes with cons, right? This type of unit is expensive, right? Because it requires training. The commanders, sub-commanders, even the NCOs need to understand how battle doctrine goes, what strategies are, tactical objectives, whatever. They need to understand the big picture and the small picture. This is obscenely expensive in real life, and in space engineers, because we don't pay money for our, comrades. At least I hope we don't. But this is very time-consuming. You need to spend time outside of the game, or outside of the scenario, to practice this. You need to spend a lot of time with the same people, and everyone needs to know the big picture. But most importantly, they need to know doctrine, right? Are we an artillery-style composition where we want to stay back and engage from distance, or are we a brawler type, right? What if one of your pilots decides he wants to go in and the other one sees the exact same problem and decides he wants to engage from distance? Now you have conflict and you've just ended up a far worse situation. This style has a lot of benefits, but it also has a very easy margin for failure. Okay, let's tie this into space engineers, right? I want to emphasize, some people might view all this and it's like, hey, I'm a centralized commander, or I want a decentralized strategy. Yes, this is technically a thing, but realistically, the real world is a little more complicated, and you're actually going to be on a slider. Yes, you'll probably, err to one of the sides or to the other sides, but since we're in small unit tactics, there will always be a degree of centralized command. However, there will be some tailoring, so to speak, and I'll get into that in a second. Your job as commander is to understand what kind of unit you have and which command emphasis you want to favor to play to your strengths. Remember, centralized command is really good, assuming all information flow is perfect. And to a degree, it is, right? We have Discord and we can talk to each other instantaneously. However, Discord also comes with downsides. Because you can't pick and choose your words, right? You're not writing up a brief or information or writing up a Morse code message. You speak very freely. And this is useful, but it's also very bad. Because you can have the same thing that plagues militaries with radios nowadays. Comms clutter.
Oh, lots of fighting. When are we supposed to go to the station? Kermit, go backwards.
Either way, just get behind their formation.
Okay, I'm fucking alone here. I'm just see what
I know. You'll be fine. The Resolute.
Look, it's not
McCann, what's your status?
Rabbit's still pilot. We've lost most of our nose.
I'm gonna talk
Ravager. I
control
can't see
right
what's
now.
going on.
Ravager, fire support mission Black Ops scanning. Recommend you jump to
I've
evac
killed
now.
the bridge. I've killed the bridge
now,
on
we can't tell what's going on. Just jump. Maximum range. Get out of here. I don't jump drive.
This can break down fast and completely cripple a centrally commanded unit. The commander can end up with just way too much information that doesn't matter and way too little information that does matter, right? Because no one can get a word in. This requires a different type of discipline. While the decentralized units need to practice doctrine, right, working together, the centralized unit can't just rely on the commander. The units below him have to learn how to be disciplined, not only to follow orders and execute orders in the manner described, right, and not to try to, do their own thing, but they also need to understand radio discipline or comms discipline. A lot of times, people feel the need to say everything, and a lot of times that everything is useless. Information like, I got hit, or, I'm fucking him up, right? Sounds kind of useful, but you're actually just jamming up comms. What exactly does this information convey? And you might think it's conveying useful information, but is your commander going to interpret it properly, right? I got hit. Does that mean you're fully wiped out, or are you just slightly damaged? The commander can interpret that either way. Should I send reinforcements? Should I pull that ship out? I don't know. This information isn't very detailed. Similarly, I'm fucking him up. Is he actually messing him up, or does it just feel like he's messing it up from the pilot's point of view? Does the commander need to send more or less? What's going on here? Instead, comms traffic needs to be data-driven in this command style, so to speak. For example, hostile Aventine marked as Bob has minimal forward propulsion, Ravager is pursuing, damage state is nominal. Right, now the commander knows that there's an enemy vessel in the proximity of a ship called the Ravager, and that ship is nearly killed or mobility killed, and to the best of the captain's knowledge, and a friendly ship is probably looking to confirm the kill. Thus, he can decide, hey, do I want to go all in here, or should I shift my forces elsewhere? However, on the flip side, if you are a commander and you're not nearly as confident in your command style, you just don't have the RAM, so to speak, to handle 4 to 5 to 6 to 8 people simultaneously. If you don't have that ability, maybe you want to adopt a decentralized command style. That's not to say you can't do anything, right? And you just say, hey, be free, do your own thing. You're still going to make, large sweeping decisions, but a lot of the small stuff is delegated away from you towards your, sub units. You're not micromanaging as much anymore. You'll still make the coin flip call, so to speak, right? Go left, go right, formation here, fall back, attack, right? You'll still make those calls. But the unit itself at the sub level will be handled by the smaller level commanders or even the ship captains. A very basic bitch version of this is in a 4-ship formation, you handle the big picture stuff. You have a commander for every 2 ships, little 2 fire teams, so to speak, for ships, and they handle those sub 2 ships. Or, if you want to take it a step further, each ship captain is responsible for a ship, and you kind of all work more as a, infantry fire team versus a fleet. Right? If that makes sense. This works surprisingly well. And it's very hard to fight against because the unit is very fluid and able to adapt because everyone is making decisions. This works really well with mobile ships and really good pilots. You need good pilots for this to work with good instinct, right? And more importantly, that instinct has to be unanimous across the board. You don't want contradicting good decisions. You've probably heard it, right? 2 good decisions that are going in opposite directions are far worse than a bad decision followed by everyone, right? So that falls in vain here. This style de-emphasizes the commander, but it requires the subordinates, or the subships, to step up, so to speak, to fill that void. Right? So if you have good pilots, but you're not so confident with yourself, this might be the style for you. However, this requires a briefing more so than anything else and training. Objective needs to be clear. The value of the ships versus the objective need to be understood. Is it worth it to sacrifice 3 ships to take out this objective? Split decisions are the norm here, so this needs to be understood, and people need to fundamentally understand the objective and not just know the objective, if that makes sense. Once again, you can intervene as a commander. I keep saying this because people are going to misinterpret this, but you're going to be a lot less micromanaging. Whew. Okay, I'm going to wrap that up here. This was a doozy. Hold up, do people still say doozy? Did I just date myself as a boomer, as a millennial? I don't know. Next time I'm going to handle centralized formations versus decentralized formations. A lot of overlap, but a lot of new stuff. And I have a cool analogy as well. If you're curious about these concepts, go ahead and watch my Outland series. We see a lot of this in action. Before I send you guys off, gotta thank my patrons real quick. You guys, sometimes I'm at a loss for words. Good thing I'm scripting this. You guys help pay for the servers, you help pay for the music, you help pay for development, and a lot more. But most importantly, the thought of people giving me hard-earned cash to do this thing I love to do, man, it keeps me going. So, thanks you guys. Alright, that's it for me. See you guys later.